We are going to study together some of the fascinating explanations of the Ksav Sofer, and our Parsha is Mishpatim, of course, and you can find it, if you're with me, in the Art Scroll Chumash on page 416. It's Exodus chapter 21, Chaf Aleph. Ve'ele mishpatim asher tasim lifneihem. These are the ordinances which you shall place before them. Now, ordinances, truthfully, I'm not exactly expert in the meaning of the English word ordinances, but I'm just saying that ordinance is the term by which we render those laws which regulate commercial life, laws of torts, personal injury, laws of monetary matters. That is to say, the laws that regulate interaction among people, as opposed to the ceremonial laws or the ritual laws or the mitzvahs bein adam la makom. And this is the primary subject, or the notable subject, although it's not the exclusive subject, of our Parshas Mishpatim. So let's get right into it. The Ksav Sofer begins with quoting a medrash, and just read you a few words of that medrash, which he quotes and seeks to elucidate. Hadahu d'ksiv va'oz melech mishpat ahev, that the mighty king loves judgment. He loves justice. Amar lehem Moshe. That's the pasuk in Tehillim. Moshe said to the Jewish people, "Hakadosh Baruch Hu nasan lechem es Torah." So the Almighty gave you His Torah. Im ein atem mishamrim hadinim notel mikem es Torah. So if you don't keep the dinim, Hashem is going to take the Torah back. He gave you the Torah. That's last week's Parsha, Matan Torah, the 10 Commandments, the other mitzvahs associated with it. When I say associated with it, I mean it represents really all of the Taryag mitzvahs. So collectively, the Medrash says that Hashem gave the Torah to the Jewish people, and Moshe said there's a condition that if you keep the dinim, then that's great. But if you don't keep them, God is going to take back His Torah. Hashem gave you the Torah only on condition that you keep the dinim. So the Ksav Sofer says that the Mefarshim on the Medrash are a bit mystified. What's so notable or so unique about the dinim? Surely the dinim are part of the mitzvahs of the Torah. The mitzvahs of the Torah that are contained within the Torah, that is to say, the content of the Torah, the 613 mitzvahs of the Torah, of course, include many of what we would call mishpatim or dinim. They're included within it. So is it not a kind of circular reasoning to say, here's the Torah. If you keep part of the Torah, then that's great. If you don't keep that part of the Torah, I'm taking the whole Torah back. So Ksav Sofer says that we find a famous Gemara in Shabbos, which says that at the time that a person is called to judgment after 120 years, sometimes sooner, Tchilas dino shel adam, the beginning of his judgment is a few preliminary questions. And one of those questions is, Nasata v'nasata be'emuna. Have you given and received? Have you sold and purchased? Have your business interactions been of with faithfulness, with integrity? Have you been honest in your business affairs? And of course, it doesn't mean only someone who is a merchant or a trader or someone who is an investor. It applies to all of us. We all buy and sell, or at least we buy. And there are opportunities for to uphold those laws or possibly to seek to undermine them. So that is the first question among the kind of preliminary questions which a person is asked. And if he answers in the affirmative, then he has the opportunity, so to speak, to be evaluated and ultimately perhaps to be ushered into the bliss of the next world. But if not, then he is excluded. Tchilas dino shel adam. Why is that considered like a prerequisite? After 120 years, it's almost as if the evaluation is focused on several subjects, actually, but that is one of them. And why is it so essential? So he says that the Gemara tells us, Gemara in Sukkah and elsewhere, we have the concept of lulav hagazul, a lulav which is stolen. And this gives rise, the Talmud elaborates or generalizes it further, to the interesting and troubling phenomenon of mitzvah haba'a ba'avera, a mitzvah which is accomplished through the agency of a transgression. So if a person steals a lulav and he now wants to use it for the mitzvah, or he steals an esrog, which tends to be a lot more expensive, more valuable, more precious, more costly, or for that matter, if a person steals matzah, there's a mitzvah to eat matzah on the Seder night. What if a person steals matzah? Now it comes to Seder night, he wants to fulfill a mitzvah. So this is the phenomenon of mitzvah haba'a ba'avera. The Gemara also says that if a person steals a measure of wheat and he processes the wheat and he grinds it and he makes flour from it, and now he's kneading his dough and he takes off a portion and he designates it for the Kohen. That's called hafrashas challah. And he makes a bracha on hafrashas challah, or he makes a bracha on the bread which he eats. And in his mind, perhaps he is processing this bread in accordance with the mitzvah of the Torah, hafrashas challah, other things. It says the Talmud, this man who recites a blessing on the bread that he proposes to eat is not reciting a blessing. He's not blessing God. He is cursing God. Because the pasuk says, "Botzea barech na'etz Hashem," which the Talmud understands to mean the one who botzea, one who breaks bread. That's the sort of drash, a person who breaks bread. But the drash is botzea, who acquires the bread through illicit means. But barechen, he recites the blessing. It's as if he is cursing God. And this is true for tefillin and mezuzahs. This is true for, dare I say, tzedakah as well. If a person's profit is ill-gotten and he gives generously to charity, so all of these mitzvahs, says Iksav Sofer, they are all nullified because they are all achieved through the agency of a transgression. So he says, according to this, all of the mitzvahs that a person does, that doesn't mean every mitzvah. There are some mitzvahs which don't involve any financial outlay at all. But there are a great many mitzvahs which do involve, as I say, financial cost. Either you purchase something, or such as a tefillin, which can be quite expensive, or mezuzahs, or, as I said, you give charity, or even hospitality. You invite guests into your home. But someone who does that, he is charitable, he is compassionate, he is hospitable, but his money is acquired through illicit means. Says Iksav Sofer, Mishenim Mishem Hadinim Mishpatei Tzedek Kol HaMitzvos She'oseh La'ayin Nechshavu. All of the mitzvahs which he does are nullified; they count for nothing. He says that's why that's what the Medrash means when it says that if you keep the dinim, then you have the potential to keep the other mitzvahs of the Torah. But if you don't keep the dinim, Hashem says, I'm taking the Torah back. Because the mitzvahs that you attempt to do, propose to do, believe that you are doing are invalid if the wherewithal with which you perform those mitzvahs is itself acquired through illicit or unethical or halachically forbidden means. That's the meaning of the statement in the Medrash. And if you keep the dinim, if your interaction with other people, if you uphold the principles of what we might call kosher money, then the other mitzvahs that you perform, are going to be evaluated on their own merit. And if you are meritorious, that's fantastic. But if not, then, so to speak, you have undermined the basis for your mitzvah observance. And then he adds on one last very clever flourish, and this will help you remember this little thought from Ksav Sofer. Ve'ela mishpatim asher tasim lifneihem. These are the ordinances which you shall place before them. Which you shall place before them, meaning the Jewish people. And it goes on right away, etc. These are the ordinances to place before them. Says Iksav Sofer, maybe there's another way to interpret it. These are the ordinances that you shall place before the other mitzvahs of the Torah as a kind of prereq to the fulfillment of the mitzvahs of the Torah. When our Parsha Mishpatim follows as it does immediately after Parsha Yisro, after the giving of the Torah, after the 10 Commandments, and after the Jewish people said, although actually the phrase appears later on in our Parsha, but sequentially, chronologically, it's after the people said Na'aseh v'nishma. So now the Torah says, these are the mitzvahs that you shall place in a prior position to that of all the other mitzvahs of the Torah. Ela Mishpatim. I'm sorry, I may have said mitzvahs. Ela Mishpatim. These are the ordinances which you shall place in a prior position, because they are the prerequisite. They are the means by which a person has the possibility of correctly fulfilling the mitzvahs of the Torah. A love of Hashem, belief in God, loving your fellow man. These mitzvahs are dependent on the dinim. As I said, even though some of them do not involve a financial outlay, but again, a person who is corrupt in his commercial affairs, he has undermined the basis of all of his other mitzvah observance. So that's what Ksav Sofer says about El HaMishpatim and the Medrash that we mentioned. Just have here in my notes, someone once told me about a tenant. Someone had a certain property. He had a tenant in the property, and the tenant, okay, probably was a bit disturbed actually, but he was very devout and he spent his time praying, and he even wrote a few books of the Breslov nature. And this tenant was completely corrupt. He was a gazlan. He was guilty of theft, stayed for months and years without paying, and gave no end of grief to the landlord. I mean, these kinds of instances can be easily multiplied. So it's not only the sort of wealthy person whose business dealings are doubtful. It can be someone on the other side of the ledger as well. But my point is that even though he was a supposedly very devout, very spiritual person, but the basis of his mitzvah observance was undermined by his own behavior. I want to share now a very insightful, and you can judge for yourself if you consider it radical, but a very fascinating interpretation to a pasuk, a few psukim, which are very compelling. The psukim themselves are very, you might say, almost intimidating. I remember hearing my Rosh Yeshiva more than 40 years ago, about 45 years ago, elaborate on these psukim. I still recall exactly what he said. I'm not going to review that now, but I'm talking here about chapter 22, verse 22, or we'll go back even one pasuk to pasuk chaf. So let's go on page 430. If you're with me in Mishpatim, chapter 22, verse 20. The Torah says, "V'ger lo soneh v'lo silchatzenu." Do not oppress or exploit or pressure a proselyte, because you were foreigners in the land of Egypt, and you didn't like it when they oppressed you. Don't do that to other people. Kol almana v'yasum lo sa'anun. Any widow or orphan, do not oppress, do not grieve. Now that's true, Rashi says, for every person. The Torah is just mentioning people whose position is weak, who are vulnerable, who are subject to exploitation, and who feel the suffering of the a harsh word or the oppression very acutely. But it's actually applicable to any person. Im aneh, then here's the pasuk, which is the really sharp one, the really intimidating one. Im aneh saneo, so if you surely afflict him, ki im tzaok itzak elai, when he calls out to me in anguish, Shamoa eshmatz akaso, I will hearken to his cry. V'chara pi, and my anger will flare. V'haragti eschem, and I will kill you. V'cherev, by the sword. V'yuneshechem almanos, your wives will become widows. Uvenechem yisumim, and your children will become orphans. Very harrowing imagery, and the Torah is describing in the most catastrophic terms, the most terms of absolute reprehension, someone who conducts himself in such a way as to exploit the weak and the vulnerable and those who are in a position of where they are subject to exploitation. And by the way, it's talking here really about onas dvarim, about just speech, about language which is aggressive or insulting or belittling. Very, as I say, intimidating stuff. Ksav Sofer has a very novel idea. He asked the question which perhaps is on your mind as well. We find several double expressions here. Now, the simple explanation for the double expression is as an intensifier. It's a very common biblical idiom. It's a way of expressing the intensity of the event or the emotion. Im ane sa'aneo. So if you surely afflict him, kim tsaoki sakelai, he will call out to me, v'shamo ishma tzakaso. Says Ksav Sofer, a completely different idea. We have an important principle, and that is that, I'm sorry, I mention a further question he asked. If you look closely at it, this passage begins in the singular. V'ger lo sonevelo silchatsenu, in the singular, as if the Torah is addressing the individual. Then it goes to the Pluki Gem Reisem Eretz Yisrael. Then Kol Amanavi Yosem Lo Sa'anun, do not oppress. Imane Tane also, if you oppress him, if you in the singular oppress him, Kitzak Itzak Eli, he will call out to me. Shemo Ishmat Tzakos, I will hear his cry. V'chara apiba v'haragti eschem b'charev. Now it's in the plural. I will kill you by the sword. V'hayu neshechem, and your wives will be widows, and your children will be orphans. So it progresses. It changes from the singular to the plural. So this question is raised by Ibn Ezra, and Ibn Ezra says something which I think makes good sense, but Ksav Sofer has a different take on it. He says that Ibn Ezra says that the Torah here is hinting to the societal malaise, that if a person oppresses and afflicts and demeans those who are weak and poor, those who are vulnerable, those who are without means or resources to respond or to defend themselves, if that is the habit, if that becomes the rhythm, the pattern within the society, it will corrupt the society as a whole. And indeed, those who have been oppressed will call out to Hashem, and he will punish the oppressors. The whole society will pay the price. So according to Ibn Ezra, the point is that the transition from the singular to the plural is to show how this will snowball. It will lead one thing to another, and it can infect and indeed toxify, there's such a word, the whole society. Ksav Sofer has a related but a different idea, and I think this is novel. He says that a person who is punished because of someone else, if Ruvain calls out to Hashem and invokes or pleads or is responsible, so to speak, precipitates the divine punishment against Shimon, and Shimon is punished because of Ruvain, then subsequently Reuven will be punished because he was responsible for the suffering of Shimon. Again, even though the Torah here speaks of an oppressor and an oppressed, but if the one who is oppressed calls out to God and, so to speak, invokes or invites or seeks to incite divine retribution against his oppressor, and he succeeds, as the pasuk says, "Shemo Ishmat Tzakos," I will hear his cry, and I will punish you accordingly. But the one who has called out in pain, and the one who has, so to speak, brought about the punishment to the oppressor, he will then be punished as well. He says that's how we understand the double lashon. Im anei sanei so. If you oppress him, and as a result you are punished, then he will be punished for bringing about your punishment. And this, I think, is a novelty here. I think Ksav Sofer is addressing the cycle of punishment, the sort of he is opposed to the culture of victimhood and the calls for punishment and retribution and seeking to bring down the privileged class. This kind of class warfare or the cultural wars in which we have almost a hierarchy of victimization and the idea that certain categories of people can never be victims, they can only be oppressors, and the oppressors are always wicked, and the victims ipso facto are righteous. This kind of contemporary woke ideology, I think Sofer here is criticizing it. And he is saying that, yes, of course, the Torah makes it clear that it's forbidden to oppress others, to oppress anyone. But if one does oppress, and the one who is oppressed invites or evokes divine wrath against the oppressor, then the one who was oppressed will also be punished, because there is a better way to resolve the conflict, whether it's taking the oppressor to a din Torah, or pursuing justice through the legal system, or even, so to speak, praying to Hashem to be saved from the oppression, but not to what we call Moser Din. This is a very dangerous enterprise, a very dangerous approach, in which a person seeks to, like I said, incite divine anger against another person. And if he does, then that anger will ultimately rebound to him as well. We have a portal on our website, and Ask the Rabbi column. It's called Ask Rabbi Rashi. And actually, when a person, whoever he may be or she may be, Google's Ask the Rabbi, so our Ask Rabbi Rashi comes up on that list. And therefore, I do get some questions from all over the world, different cultures. Not all of the inquirers are Jewish, although I think this particular inquiry I want to tell you about certainly is Jewish. I don't want to read it to you. I don't need to read it to you in detail. But the writer claims to have been greatly harmed, maybe neglected or abused by his parents, and then he also faults a certain cousin for ruining his life. And the question wants to know, when or in what way can he hope or expect to see his parents punished by God for what they've done to him, and his cousin as well for ruining his life. Now, obviously, with only a few sentences, not especially articulate sentences, I am not in a position, and in fact, I told him he really needs to speak to a rabbi or a social worker or a therapist, to advise him. But I did, and probably this person, whether through the consequence of the treatment he experienced as a younger person, or for other reasons, he's probably very, angry and feels victimized. But what I told him is that rather than focus on retribution, rather than focus on craving the revenge or the feeling of vindication when someone else suffers on your behalf, I said it's much more valuable, much more helpful, much more positive to work towards a reconciliation, to hope for a sincere apology and a reckoning, and ultimately moving on from the suffering that you have endured. This preoccupation with retribution, I said to him, is not helpful. It's not good for you, and it's not good for the society. This quest for retribution is damaging. That's what Sofer says over here. So in a novel interpretation, he says that the double lashon, the expression, and that's why it starts with the singular and goes to the plural, because there's not only one person who's going to be punished for his wrongdoing, but there will be two people, because the one who was oppressed, who brought about the punishment to his oppressor, will also be punished for what he has done. It's a novel interpretation, a chidush of Sofer, which I find fascinating and novel, as I said. I want to tell you, finally, a third idea from Sofer I'd like to share with you tonight. And this is towards the end of the Parsha, chapter 23, verse 25, Chaf Gimel, Pasuk Chaf Hey. And here, the Torah speaks about serving Hashem, and the reward that will ensue. Va'avadatem, it's on page 438 if you're with me in the Art Scroll Chumash. Va'avadatem es Hashem Elokeichem uveiraches lachmecha v'esmeimecha. You will serve the Lord your God, and he will bless your bread and your water, which probably symbolizes the basic sustenance which a person needs to survive. Having said that, bread and water is fairly basic, as opposed to something more lavish, a more lavish reward. V'hasirosi machala mikirbecha, and I will remove illness from your midst. Machala mikirbecha. So Ramban asks that surely the Torah, we would expect, or maybe hope, for a more extensive, a more elaborate bracha than just by serving God, you get bread and water, ample quantities, and Hashem will remove illness from your midst. It's like if a person, reaches the age of 40 or 50 and he hasn't yet succumbed to some terrible illness, you say, well, this because he keeps the Torah so well. Okay, that's health is a blessing which should never be taken for granted, but it's a bit low ball. It's a little bit kind of underwhelming to say that this is the reward that you can expect, that you won't take ill. I mean, presumably it means that eventually a person will succumb to old age and that sort of thing. But he won't have illness ravage the society, the Jewish people, if they are deserving. Okay, that, as I said, is a nice thing. Ramban asks, isn't there more to it? So Ksav Sofer says something quite interesting here. He says it is the nature of the human condition to always seek more success, more prosperity, more wealth, more profit, to enjoy the trappings or the consequences of affluence, and to seek more and more of it. This is human nature. The Talmud puts it in a pithy way: Mishi yesh lo mana rotze masayim. One who has 100, he seeks 200. This is human nature. Of course, if a person has that kind of mindset, if you take it to an extreme, actually, he'll never be happy, he'll never be satisfied, he'll never be contented, because whatever he achieves, he'll want more, and he'll feel inadequate. He'll feel as if, especially if he looks around, he sees other people who do have more, a larger home, or a more glamorous home, or more fashionable clothing, or a more luxurious car, or they take more exotic vacations, and this sort of thing. If a person is always overly conscious of what others have, or what he himself seeks, he may never actually enjoy the contentedness and the sense of accomplishment in what he does have. And, a person has the right to enjoy the fruits of his labor. But sometimes if a person is fixated on what I can achieve and what I want, he may never be happy even with what he has. He quotes, Ksav Sofer quotes the Haflah. Haflah was Pinchas Halevi Horowitz, one of the, he was the brother of the famous Rebbe of Shmelka, and Pinchas and Shmelka Horowitz were two of the great followers of the Maggid of Mezrich, and his writings are very highly regarded. It's interesting that this particular idea, which Chassam Sofer also quotes in the name of Haflah, actually doesn't appear to be in his writings. So maybe Chassam Sofer heard it as an oral tradition. His son Ksav Sofer, our friend for the year, perhaps heard it from his father, but he quotes it as if it's printed there. But in any case, the idea is a beautiful idea, and I'm sure if we have the testimony of Ksav Sofer, Chassam Sofer, that it comes from the Haflah, I'm sure that it does. He quotes the pasuk, a pasuk very familiar to us all. And I have to say that I was delighted to read this earlier this week, because at Kesher in the mornings we have been learning about the laws of Psukei de Zimra, and one of the laws in the recitation of those verses, Psalms of praise, is the importance of that pasuk. It appears in Ashrei, and the halacha is that if a person says it and he doesn't concentrate on it, or he doesn't even dare I say, remember that he said it because he's not even conscious of the meaning, he has to go back and repeat it again. This is a verse which means you open your hands and satisfy the desire of every living thing. Umasbiya lechol chai ratzon. Says the Hafla, and Ksav Sofer quotes him, the second half of this posuk, and actually I said it, Kesha, the other day, just this idea, and I subsequently saw it here in the name of the Hafla. Umasbiya, to satisfy, to satiate, kol chai, all life, ratzon, its desire. If a person has a desire, or if a person generally is full of desires which are unrequited, which are unrealized, which are unfulfilled, he will be frustrated. He will feel deprived because he's craving something which he doesn't have. The blessing is that Hashem will grant to a person the phenomenon, the experience of Sameach Bechelko. He'll be pleased with what he has. He'll be contented with his lot. Says the Ksav Sofer, when the Torah says that you shall serve the Lord your God, and he will bless your bread and your water, which means you'll have ample provision, ample sustenance. And it means not only food to eat and water for hydration, but it means all of the other necessities of life you'll have. This will be the blessing. What will be the further blessing? That you'll have no more illness within. Says the Ksav Sofer, what is the machala bikirbecha? The inner feeling of inadequacy, the inner feeling I'm a failure, because although I'm earning this much a year, but I know someone who's earning more. I've got a rival or a colleague or a competitor who got a promotion or got a bonus, and I didn't get that bonus. Or I did get a bonus, but his bonus was more than mine. And therefore, I don't feel fulfilled. That is the inner illness that Hashem will remove. Hasirosi machala mikirbecha. This machala, this illness, this inner sense of failure, of depression, of inadequacy, of demoralization that can lead a person to feel completely like a sense of purposelessness in life. That is the machala bikirbecha. He says, anyways, I don't know if contemporary psychologists would agree that only Hashem can relieve that illness. That is an illness which, a pharmacist cannot prescribe something for that. Nowadays, we've got medicines that probably do help, and we have therapists who can help, no doubt. But I love the insight that he says that's the machala bikirbecha. That's the illness within. It's not evident, or at least doesn't, it maybe have manifest in physical symptoms, but it is not something which is primarily physiological. It is psychological, but it can be very devastating. Lo aleinu, a person can fall to depression, and even worse, to self-harm and disastrous consequences, which are because of that machala bikirbecha. So that's how Ksav Sofer explains that pasuk that when you serve Hashem, that Hashem will bless you in the providing you with what you need, and that the sense of purposelessness, or as I said, the demoralization or depression or worse, bikirbecha, Hashem will remove that. You'll be blessed also, masbiya l'chol chai ratzon, with the sense of contentment, the sense of the fulfillment of a person's desires. So thank you for listening tonight. And we've had 3 insights from Ksav Sofer, just to review them very briefly. We said that the dinim precede asher tasim lifneihem. These are the dinim which must precede the mitzvahs of the Torah. Because if a person falls foul of the dinim, then all the other mitzvahs which he does, or a large number of them, will be nullified, because he will be essentially seeking to fulfill a mitzvah haba al yidei avera. We said imane taneo. So if you oppress someone, then when he calls out to me, you will be punished. But then, says Ksav Sofer, he will be punished for bringing about your punishment. This is against the culture of victimization and retribution, which I think infects our society today. Ksav Sofer anticipated that 150 years ago. And the last week we said, I will remove the illness from within. That's the inner sense of failure or anger or depression, which is the machala bikirbecha. Thank you to everyone.